Just recently, I produced another opening video about accelerated Draken, and I have to mention that this is fully analyzed on a much higher level than we had any previous DVDs, because the only reason why it was on a much higher level, because we used complete and exhausted analysis by the Ripka. So, of course, we supplied Ripkas with idea, and it was double-checked and triple-checked, and after that only I fully endorsed that opening. That, I think, is one of the most reliable openings for black on E4. Well, but if you play accelerated Draken, you absolutely need to know how to play against Maroczy bind. After E4, C5, knight F3, whether you go knight C6 or G6, there is no way to avoid Maroczy bind. And so knight C6, D4, C takes D, knight takes D4, G6, and now C4. Okay, here I want to tell you that on a previous DVDs where we covered Maroczy bind, I suggested lines, and as you know, all lines and all openings, sooner or later, they being updated, upgraded, or refuted. Well, the line I was recommending, which is bishop G7, bishop E3, knight F6, knight C3, and knight G4. After thorough analysis, I want to tell you that this position is not very good for black. And I have no shame admitting it, because almost every opening that exists and that is considered to be good went through number of renovations and upgrades and updates and analysis, and it's been changed multiple times before it came to the shape it is now. So knight G4 line, I don't want to go into big details why it's bad, but I can show you briefly. Line I was recommended, knight takes D4. By the way, bishop takes D4 is not that great either, because bishop takes, knight takes, and castle long. Actually, you can take any opening publication that covers Maroczy bind, covers accelerated Draken, and you will see there all the answers. But only difference between these publications and what I came up with was knight G4, queen takes G4, knight takes D4, and for a while this opening was doing well for me, but then I found there a position that is not that great for black, and absolutely I took it off the playlist of the openings. So in this position, bishop D3, castle, and either bishop D3 or maybe even actually knight B5 here, castle, and here white plays simply either bishop E2 or bishop D3. Well, I don't think we need to know through all analysis. On bishop D3, we can take on B5 and go D5, and bishop E2 at the same time gives significant problems to black. And my recommendation, knight takes b5, cb, d5, ed, and f5 does not do well. So you don't need to know it. Believe me, that you don't need to know why and what is the refutation. I will just tell you, we have to abandon this line, and in a starting position of Maroczy bind here, when white just went c4, we have to delay white's option to play bishop e3, and we can do that with knight f6 after knight c3. We have another move that we can delay bishop e3 move, and it's d6, because on bishop e3 now we may have knight g4, now bishop e2, and now white ready to play bishop e3, and here we take on d4, because before bishop comes to e3 we want to make sure white develops queen in the early stage. Now we go bishop g7, and in this position white has several different choices. In this position, actually, they can play bishop e3, they can castle, or they can play bishop g5. And with the latest analysis with Rybka and with the latest researches, I can vouch that this position is absolutely safe, and as they used to claim that white has certain space advantage and certain pressure, I am challenging it, and Rybka is with me, and with Rybka I have no fear and no doubt that we can show you how to play this position. So what can we say about this position, and particularly and about these types of position? The danger for black is to get squeezed. In other words, black has difficulties playing e5 or playing d5, opening center, but they have, without moving too many pawns, they have to come up with a counterplay, and this is absolutely essential. So white has here several ways to develop. They can put bishop on e3 and queen on d2, bishop on g5 and queen on d2, or bishop on g5, queen on e3. Well, let's look at some of those continuations. Let's go with bishop g5 move. Now we castle, and suppose white goes queen e3, or maybe castling, because we don't have any great retreat with the knight to create threat. Bishop e6, and here are two continuations for white: queen e3, which was very popular for a number of years, and the second one is queen to d2. Let's look at queen e3. In my opinion, the best move here that gives black good game is queen b6. It's not a normal move. It looks very dubious because if white decides to exchange queens, it looks like b pawns will be weak and will be hard to defend, plus white's knight get outpost on b5. However, that's not so, because right now black has tremendous counterplay and white amazingly cannot stop black's breakthrough with b5. Sounds very strange, this statement, but that's true. b5 is protected 1, 2, 3 times, but the weakness of c4 pawn and a1 h8 diagonal makes black's position at least equal, maybe even slightly better. What can white do? Ideally, what white would want to do to play like this and stop b5 forever from black from playing b5. If this happens, we're going to have bad game. But white cannot do it. White will not make it. Now, let's see why. Suppose they are on the way and they play rook c1. They want to play b3 and a4. On rook c1, we go rook c8. We are attacking c4 pawn, and after b3, when white is one move away from the happiness, which is a4 move, we go b5, and white has to solve some difficult problems. If pawn takes b5, black has rook takes c3, rook takes c3, knight takes e4, attacking g5, bishop, c3, rook, and down the line a2 pawn is going to be hanging. White is in a lot of trouble. What other options white has here after b5? If knight takes b5, we can play rook takes a2. Now we have active rook. We also could have played bishop knight takes e4, followed by rook takes a2. So black is doing very fine. And actually there are no other ways of stopping b5. Even the a4 move is bad as well. We still go rook f to c8, and when white goes b3, obviously we cannot take on e4, and but now white has one pawn on b5 controlling, the other pawn, bishop and knight. Black has zero support. Nevertheless, b5 gives black very, very nice game. Let's see why. Knight takes b5, knight takes c4, attacks bishop and the rook. C-pawn obviously cannot take because knight on c3 hanging, and a-pawn cannot take either because rook takes a1, rook takes a1, knight takes e4, and black wins. So it's amazing how can b5 work in position. You can go b5 where 4 pieces control that square, and nevertheless you can successfully play b5. So this is very good position for black. So after queen b6, in my opinion, best continuation for white is queen d2, but then black can go queen a5. So in this position, white goes queen e2, queen e3, we go queen b6, and on queen d2, queen a5. But if white goes immediately queen d2, we still can go queen a5. So you see these two variations, they merge. So we can say after the queen e3 variation shouldn't even exist because it transposes into the queen d2 variation, unless, of course, white takes on b6, and then, according to what I showed you, you are doing very fine. So bishop g5, no, bishop e6 now, and queen, well, we have now a threat of knight d5 that will totally, we're attacking queen, and we can totally ruin white's pawn structure. So queen already has to move. Queen d2 is the move. And the proximate continuation after queen d2, we would go queen a5. So I just once more mentioned, so we just transposed from queen e3 variation, or if white played immediately queen d2. It's the same position. The most recommended move for black is rook a c1. White goes rook f to c8, attacking c4 pawn, b3, a6. Well, this position is being played a number of times, and f4. f4 is the move, and here we strongly recommend in this position not to play b5, because then we arrive to some complications that are favor white. So we strongly recommend to stop possible attack by white and make very strong move, rook to c5. Well, good response for black, for white, is queen e3, h6, bishop h4, and here in one of the games black tried ambitious g5, and we certainly don't recommend to play this move because white played bishop to e1, and you see knight d5 is coming, and black got very uncomfortable position. So what we recommend is simply rook a to e8, and you have absolutely nothing to fear in this position. Black is very, very comfortable. This is another position that you should keep in mind to play. You see, you have potential g5 coming, maybe after queen c7, maybe with rook on e8, g5 is much better. Actually, you can dig in the database and you will see the differences. Now, we can't go through every possibility white might have. The way you should analyze and the way you should learn accelerated Draken Maroczy bind, or in this case, like every opening, so you should get the basic ideas in key variations. Then you should use your judgment. And once you use your judgment, you came to some conclusion, I think that's what I should do in this case, in the other case, then you can double check it on some computer program. We can give you main recommendation, and why you should take our recommendation, because it's based on countless hours of analysis. And we cannot provide all this analysis because this will take hours and hours and days probably. And there is another catch. Even if we gave you all this analysis, you are not going to remember them. No one can remember them all, but you have a very good chance to remember them if you came to those conclusions yourself and if you did some research. So the basic points here been already made. So this position is very playable, and according to Ripka, who has very deep analysis of certain positions and evaluations, it gives absolute zero advantage to white. So let's go to other continuations. One of the most popular setups for white here is bishop e3, and when black castles, play queen d2, and on bishop e6, simply rook c1. Now, why rook c1? Because the idea of rook c1 move is to delay castle and get position with queens off the board with some pressure to develop a good bind on it. For example, queen a5, b3, on the rook f2, c8, f3, and on a6, here knight a4 or knight d5. After knight a4, possible continuation is queen takes d2, king takes d2. Now we have to stop this fork. So knight d7 move, although it was played a number of times in tournaments, rook c6, and black did okay here as well. But knight d7 was played, knight d7 we can play, and this position is okay for black. White does not have much pressure. What was happening before? White used to play g4 with the idea to get more space, not so much checkmate black's king, but to get more space maybe on the king side. So we can create counterplay attempt. E takes f, g takes f, h3. This game was played, and I don't remember white winning any games here. Maybe one game, and white doesn't really have an advantage. Even the game white won, they won, maybe better player was playing, but it's not because black has bad position. We can go here, king f7, I don't know, we can go rook f4 maybe, rook f8 maybe. So it doesn't look like white has any advantage at all. Now going back to the position where white played king knight a4. Well, we should ask here, what else can white do here? Only other option would be knight d5, and even now after knight d5 we're going to have to play queen takes d2, king takes d2, and now after simply knight takes d5, c takes d5 and bishop d7, or e takes d5 and bishop d7. It's hard to imagine how can white play for win this position. Black even can go e6 next move, on d takes e, bishop takes e6. This is a meaningless weakness on d6. Black has more active pair of bishops and potential d5. It's absolutely equal position. This one as well as if white has taken with the c pawn and bishop d7. Position is totally equal. So as we say, white in this position cannot play bishop e3 because of knight g4. But for a number of years, popular continuation here for white was f3, with the same idea, not letting knight g4 and later play bishop e3 and queen d2, kind of a Zamish setup. So on f3, we would like to take on d4, queen takes d4. Almost no one plays it like this because the practice and games played and which you can find in databases showed that white has at least no advantage. Black may even be better in some positions. So we go bishop g7, bishop e3. Now we castle, and notice queen has to move as soon as we castle, because now our bishop is protected and we have positional threat of knight to g4. Queen d2, bishop e6, and black has the same plan of going a6, queen a5, b5. And at some point, white came up with a rook c1. That was a number of years, maybe over 20 years ago. That's how they used to play. And on queen a5, knight d5. Now, I have to point here that going to endgame by playing queen takes d5, queen takes d2, king takes d2, and now we have to eliminate the knight. If we take with the knight, that's not good because white takes with the c pawn and penetrates on the 7th rank. And taking with the bishop is not as great either because white can take with the c pawn and later play g3 and bishop h3. So what should we do in this position? What should we do on knight d5? It's okay to take on a2. This is a good position. Knight takes e7, king h8. This position analyzed for a number of years, and there have been a lot of games played with it, and we have nothing new on our own because there was no need for anything new. You can easily find games played with discontinuations, and you will see that black is doing at least fine. So black has absolutely no problems at all. In this position, I want to mention one possibility for white. What white might think of doing is, and they used to play it like a lot of years ago, but you cannot see too many games played with it today. It's a knight c2 move. This move makes sense, and the sense is, I've been always saying that when you have space advantage, try not to exchange pieces. White has some space advantage because of c4 and e4 pawns, and they try to stay away from exchanges, so they played knight to c2. But on the other hand, it follows that principle, but on the other hand, it violates the other principle. So you cannot make 1, 2, 3 moves in the early stage of the game. But since position is semi-closed, it may be okay. But just to tell you, you cannot count on a serious advantage for white playing like this. Simply bishop g7, and on bishop e2 you castle, and now you have actually two choices. You can go bishop e6 followed by a6, rook c8, queen a5 as regular, and I like, my personal favorite is bishop to d7. Go a6, rook b8, and trying for b5 by going knight a5 and b5, and maybe knight e5 and b5. They are both 100% okay continuations for black, and knight c2 cannot possibly represent any threat or any danger for us. One other opportunity I want to introduce to you, it's a relatively new way to play this position for black. And after e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, cd, knight takes d4, g6, c4, knight f6, knight c3, d6, bishop e2, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and now bishop g7, bishop e3, castles, queen d2, and here is in a way unexpected move a5. Now let me explain why a5 now and not, for example, after bishop e6, a5. Because if you go bishop e6 and rook c1, a5 is not as strong because white can go b3, and on a4, b4. This is the only chance when we have to go, we can go a5 and not worrying about b3, and our next move is a4. And why we want our pawn on a4, I will explain in a moment. After a5, b3 is not possible because of knight takes e4. And after a5, if white castles, we go a4, and then on f3, maybe like bishop e6 and queen a5. This is very promising setup for black. Black never have to worry about knight d5 move. If pawn was on a7, queen would be hanging, and we cannot take on d2 sometimes because of knight takes e7. But when a pawn is on a4, we don't have this worry. Our queen is protected. Plus, white may have difficulty playing b3. And also, on our own, we may have sometimes a3. And on top of everything, we may have an opportunity to play knight d7, knight c5 without worrying about b4. So that's a good, another good way to play this position for black. Now let's look at a few typical games played by accelerated Draken on a high level with very good players. And I want to start a game between two very strong grandmasters played this particular variation. And a5 and a4 was played on black, white castles, black went bishop e6, rook a to b1, and queen a5. Exactly, we reached the position we talked about. Rook f to c1. White is trying to make b4 as well. The game was played in 2007 between very, very promising and some of the top grandmasters at Volokitin and Yakovenko from both, I think one is from Ukraine, the other is from Russia. And after rook f2 c1, black played rook f2 c8, and white went b4. Okay, white achieved b4, but now black got what they wanted. They got counterplay. They have very nicely placed rooks. That's what you have to go by. You have active queen, very nicely placed minor pieces. You got your active counterplay, which is the main problem in Maroczy bind, to get the counterplay. After a takes b, queen to b4, stopping b4 and also preparing rook from possible penetration. Rook to c2, knight d7. You see there is a possible outpost for c5, for knight on c5. Knight d5, queen takes d2, rook takes d2, and simply king f8. Now let's talk about this position. What does white have? White has knight on d5, and it's by far not permanent. Black has a file, very strong. On the open file on the board, black owns it. Black has no weaknesses. They have a slight space disadvantage, but their counterplay, I think, very strong. And I don't think white has here complete equality. King f8, b4 was played, very ambitious. Rook a3, king f2, protecting bishop. And black is very wisely takes advantage of their active pieces and opens position. Actually, this is very typical game and very powerfully played by black. f5. Pawn takes. Bishop takes. f5. Rook is hanging. Rook went to d1. Knight f6. And now you see if white simply takes on f6, black will take back. And black will have, there are 4 pieces on each side on the board, and every one of black's pieces are better placed than white. So in this position, white still was ambitious, playing knight b6, rook c6 was played, and now c5. Here, black position is still close to equal, but I prefer black. And black, the sacrificed exchange here, I think it's very powerful sacrifice, which gave them very, very strong position. King takes, bishop h6, check. Well, obviously white cannot play king f2 because white is going to take the rook, black is going to take the rook, and simply win a pawn on c5. So white is trying to maintain material advantage by playing f4. But now d takes c, attacking the knight, rook d8 check, king g7, and b takes c. Black is down an exchange, but the key move was rook e6 check here, king f2, bishop takes f4. Let's evaluate this position. It's clearly advantage for black. Black has one pawn for exchange, but you see two powerful bishops on f5 and f4, and possibly knight on e4. White's king is in trouble. This position is very far from endgame position. That's not an endgame. There's enough pieces still to create powerful attack, and the position has middle game tendencies here. And after bishop takes f4, knight d5 was played. This is the best move. Knight takes d5. Rook 1 takes d5. Bishop e3 check. King f1. Bishop e4. Black's bishops are very, very powerful. Rook d7, bishop c6, bishop f3. Well, here, white already sees that they cannot win the game. They try to give back an exchange and escape with the opposite color bishops. However, bishop b5 check, bishop e2, rook f6 check. Of course, black continues and tries for a win. King e1, bishop f2 check, king d1, bishop a4 check, king c1, and bishop takes c5. Now, this is an amazing position where two bishops are so powerful. Rook takes b7, bishop went to c6, and you see black wants to take another pawn on g2. Also, rook f2 will be there. Rook d to d7. White is anxious to give an exchange back and get opposite color bishops, but bishop a3 check, king d1, bishop a4 check, king e1, bishop b4 check. And now it's, if white takes bishop on b4, which they have to, there's no choice in this position, then black took the bishop on d7 and white gave back the exchange, but they couldn't get opposite color bishops. And game went on and on. We don't need to see another like 35 moves, and black won the game. Great outcome in the opening, great and very typical for accelerated Draken dynamic play, and very well performed by black. This is actually one of my favorite games because it's not that brilliant and magnificent, it's just very typical. It's a down-to-earth, typical for a Maroczy bind game. I heard a lot of times that many different players, even on higher levels, they were complaining that the problem with Maroczy bind, that it's very boring and very close game without, without much of imagination can be input there. But that's not always so. There are some very, very interesting games. For example, one we just saw, and I want to show you next game that you will see from Accelerated Draken, from Maroczy bind position, how we got little by little changed, and we got position very typical for King's Indian. and how tense the game was, and very interesting. Game was played this year in 2008 in the FIDE Grand Prix tournament between two very talented players and very highly leveled GMs. It's a top Czechoslovakian, David Navara, and one of the top young players, Vugar Gashimov from Azerbaijan. E4, C5, knight F3, knight C6, D4, CD, knight takes D4, G6, C4, knight F6, knight C3, D6, bishop E2, knight takes D4, queen takes D4, bishop G7, bishop G5, this is bishop G5 continuation, castle, rook C1. As I said, even though the bishop is protected, white doesn't have any good, black doesn't have any good retreat with a knight attacking queen. So after rook c1, h6 was played, and on bishop d2, knight d7, queen e3, knight c5. That's an interesting way to play. Black wants to f5. Most of the time, when in the early stage you retreat the knight and go to c5, you want to go for f5. Castle, first a5, make sure white cannot play b4. b3, bishop d7, just developing piece, and after f4 is obvious f5. That's what black played for. And on bishop f3, rook to c8, e takes f, g takes f. Actually, this is very interesting to evaluate this position. Let me tell you something. Normally, white has better pawn structure because these pawns are kind of hanging pawns on open files. Black has to compensate it by the active piece play, and that's what happened in this game. Knight e2, knight goes to d4, bishop c6, bishop c3, bishop takes c3, rook takes c3. And what black gets for this is G file, potentially for rooks doubling on G file, and also after exchange of light square bishops, there is a possible outpost for knight on E4. Knight D4, bishop takes F3, queen takes F3. Queen d7, rook e3, white is doubling on weak e7 pawn, rook f6, king h1, and pawn to e6. Pawn on e6 is very well protected, and black is ready to double their rooks. Rook f to e1, and now all of a sudden, black played e5. Well, there was no necessity of playing e5. You could have gone rook g8. It's a lot quieter move. But e5 is very ambitious and is not necessarily a bad move. e5, of course, on f, e, d, e, white cannot take on e5 because knight on d4 hanging. So on the other hand, black is not threatening to take the knight because of rook e7 check. So in this position, white played queen d5. But e4, knight e2, rook g8, knight c3, and rook g6. There, what we've been talking about, rooks doubled on G file. Now, rook E1, E2, B6, H3, H5, Queen D1, King H6, Rook D2, Knight D3, and Knight D5. Each knight got very good outposts, Knight on D5 and Knight on D3. And after Knight D5, Queen G7, tripling on G file, Queen F1, Rook G3. Black has very, very good game. In my opinion, Black simply has an advantage here. Rook takes G3, Queen takes G3, Queen A1, threatening Queen F6, Rook F8. Position remained close for another, 15, 16 moves. Nothing has happened, and game ended in a draw. We don't need to go throughout the whole game to see the end. But it was very interestingly played game, and you see this is for people who think that the Maroczy bind can be very, very boring. That's not always so. So, one advice I want to give to Maroczy, to people who want to be good in Maroczy bind. There are thousands of games. A lot of games Black lost. A lot of games Black won. I want you to go through these games to look, especially the games Black lost, if it's relatively good players, and look why do they lose, and try to find a reason. Why it is more important in Maroczy bind than in a huge majority of any other opening? Because Maroczy bind doesn't go too far as opening theory. It's not like Velimirovich attack in Draken variation where everything is hanging and you have to know theory almost up to 30th move. No, this is completely different. Theory ends soon, and then you have to know positions real deep. You have to be prepared very well for them, and you have to feel positions. You have to know the patterns, and that's why it's very, very important. Here is the game. Also, I would say typical for Maroczy bind, and it's black square, dark square strategy. Okay, E4, played against very famous Hungarian Grandmaster Zoltan Almazy and veteran and very strong player from Bulgaria, Kirill Georgiev. So E4, C5. Game was played several years ago, but nevertheless, it's very interesting to see what happened here. D4, CD. Knight takes D4. G6. C4, Knight F6, Knight C3, D6, Bishop E2, Knight takes D4, Queen takes D4. Don't forget to take the Knight on D4 before White plays Bishop E3. So Knight takes D4, Queen takes D4. Bishop G7, Bishop G5, castle, castle. No, actually, yeah, castle. In this position, White played Queen D2 first. Bishop E6, rook c1, queen a5, b3, rook a to c8. I like better rook f to c8, and that's what we supposed to play. But we are looking at this game not as how to play the opening move. I want to show you another Maroczy bind typical game for it. Rook a c8. And in this position, white simply castle. a6, f4, and the rook c5. That's the move we've been mentioning, with only exception that rook was on a8. Rook c5, queen e3, and rook e8. That's the move we've been mentioning as well, except h6 and bishop h4 was played. After rook e8, bishop h4, bishop h6, black found a target. They may want to go knight h5. Rook b1 with an obvious threat, rook c6, b4, queen d8, knight d5, bishop takes d5, e takes d, and rook to ca. Now let's talk about this position. At first, it may seem like black has very bad position because they are very cramped. They are cramped, that's true. But white cannot concentrate on doubling their rooks on e-file because pawn on c4 may need attention. Then pawn on b4 may need attention. Not to mention that black can go e6 and open, potentially open the e-file. So this position is very lively and black has very good potentials. a4. I think it's simply wrong move. e6, d takes e, rook takes e6, and queen h3. Queen f8. Now white is threatening to take the knight on f6 and take the bishop. Queen f8. Now black wants to go knight e4. And you see also the bishop is hanging, so bishop takes f6. Rook takes f6, f5. Rook e8. Bishop d3. And black goes bishop d2. Well, I have very good feel for this position. And I strongly believe that black has, I don't know how big, but black is better. Because the weak pawn is totally meaningless, also especially when it goes d5. It's opposite color bishops. White is more exposed and black's pieces are much better placed. Queen f3, b6, king h1, d5. Now what black wants to do, black wants to give up this pawn, take the pawn on b4, and then play bishop c5. They're going to have very, very strong dark square bishop. White went queen d1 first. And after bishop takes the b4, f takes g. Rook takes f1. Queen takes f1. H takes g. C takes d. And the rook to e5. Now black is intending to play queen e7 and bishop d6. It's a solid positional advantage because when you dominate in the center like this with opposite color bishops, it's especially dangerous for white. So in this position, after rook e5, queen f3, a5, supporting the bishop, rook f1, queen to e7, queen f6. Well, in a view of possible bishop d6 and rook h5 and rook e3, white just wants to exchange queens. After queen f6, queen takes f6, rook takes f6. On rook e1, white is going to have rook f1. So king g7 was played. And now rook f1, rook takes d5, bishop b5, and simply f5. Now this position, black has an extra pawn, and by no means it's an easy draw. It's an easy draw if we take rooks off the board, but with rooks on the board, it's a potential rook sacrifice activating a pawn, especially if king comes very close. So we don't want to analyze this game to the end. Eventually, black won this game. Very well played and very typical for Maroczy bind, because when you play Maroczy bind, like most of the time, you have better control of dark squares than white does. White has a space advantage in exchange for that. So here, dark square control totally prevailed, and it's very, very instructive. This next game I want to show you is very, very typical for potentials for black in Maroczy bind. It was played between Peter Leko and Vasily Ivanchuk, two famous GMs who need no introduction. And the game was a rapid game. It wasn't really a long time control game, but these guys are so good, and they played so many games with accelerated dragon, and some of them with each other. Game level of the game is on the level of the tournament. This game is on the level of the tournament. So in this position, white played bishop e2, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop g7, bishop e3, castle, queen d2, queen a5, white castles, and bishop e6, rook f2 c1, rook f2 c8, on pretty much standard moves, b3, and knight g4. Well, I always thought that exchange of white's light square bishop would give white some advantage. Light square bishop for the knight. And bishop d4, bishop d7. Bishop takes g7, king takes, queen d4 check, king g8. Now, let's talk about this position. White knight has more potential than black's bishop. White has some space advantage. Isn't this position much better for white? You know, the more carefully I looked and analyzed this position, I came to the conclusion that it's not. Knight d5 was played and queen d8, protecting e7 pawn. The question is, how much can white do? Eventually, black regroups all his pieces, which you're going to do in few moves, and white will run out of ways to improve their position. Actually, it's very, very instructive. a4, bishop c6, knight c3, queen a5, rook a to b1, queen c5, White tried to keep queens on the board. A5, stopping d4. Rook d1. You know, if white could make b4, they will gain more space advantage. A5, rook d1. And here, rook e1 actually was played, and the other rook went to d1. Rook e1, e6, rook e3. White is still hoping maybe some kind of an instant attack. Rook e3, rook d8, rook d1, rook d7, queen d2, rook d8, rook d3, b6. This is the position black was playing for. White cannot increase their pressure on d6 square. White's knight does not have any outposts. Black's light square bishop is very well placed, controlling all the key squares in its center. So position is about equal. A few more moves played, h3, h5, rook d4, king g7, rook d3, king g8, rook d4, king g7, queen e2, and black just demonstrates that white has absolutely no ways of making improvement. And in this position, they agreed to a draw. This just shows you again that sometimes space advantage like this, with only one minor piece on board for each side, that leads to deadlock position, which cannot be improved by either side. This is actually very typical for Maroczy bind. And of course, it's not very exciting games, you know, but when you play Maroczy bind, actually years ago, I did recommend one very exciting line for black. But now I'm telling you not to play it, because that's not a good line. And I don't want to dedicate special amount of time explaining why it's not bad, because this is for your opponent to know in case you play. If you know that something is bad, you just don't do it. That's all. Now, I want to look at some games played not on a world-class level, but on the level of average players, maybe masters, or maybe a little lower, and I want you to see the typical mistakes that can be made there and how they can be taken advantage of. So, well, let's look at a few games on lower level. I especially selected them, and here is one of them. Actually, they're masters. It's rated 23 and 24 FIDE rating, so they are not really weak players. Now, e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6. This game was played a couple of years ago. d4, cd, knight takes d4, g6, c4, knight f6, knight c3, d6, bishop e2, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop g7, bishop g5, castle, queen d2, and same a5 move. Just look. Castle, a4, f3, queen a5, rook a d1, bishop e6, and now knight d5. Okay, this is a mistake. Bishop takes d5, This is a mistake, regardless which way white takes. White took in this position ED. Even if they took CD, black is going to play rook f2 c8, and black can only be better because they have better grip on a c file. Bishop is very good after knight d7. So, but ED was played, and it's interesting to notice how white slowly fell apart. Queen takes a5, rook takes a5. Well, position is still equal, but white should not be ambitious about it. Well, after b4, a takes b, knight d7, I don't think position is equal any longer because knight d7 is very good move, stopping rook a1 because bishop on g7. And now white's knight has very nice potential outpost on c5. Black's knight. Black dominates the a file, and white's two bishops are totally meaningless here in this position. b4 was played, making more weaknesses. Rook a2, rook d2, rook a8, rook fd1, bishop c3, forcing white to take the rook on a2, rook takes a2, king f2, and black simply takes the pawn, and black is a pawn up. And when white took the pawn back, black is pawn up and it's totally winning. It has nice outpost on c5 for knight, has an extra pawn, but if white tries to get the pawn back, which would happen, bishop c5 check, king f1 f6, and bishop on e7 is toasted. So king f7 and king e8 eventually will, trap this bishop on c7. Okay, this is how carelessly white tries to advance their pawns and get space advantage. And a lot of times, this just one open file that black gets gives them more than sufficient counterplay, and a lot of times, like in this game, even serious advantage. Next game. Actually, I found next game is also very, very instructive. The game was played between two also relatively good masters in a very interesting, in a very well-known position we already mentioned when I was analyzing various possibilities for white. Knight f3, knight c6, d4 cd, knight takes, d4 g6 c4, d6. This was played through weird move order, but eventually we got the position we need. Don't pay attention to the move order. Bishop e2, knight takes d4, we got to the position we're supposed to analyze. Bishop g7, bishop e3, black castles, queen d2, bishop e6, rook c1, queen a5, f3, rook fc8, b3, a6, knight a4, queen takes d2, king takes d2, knight d7, g4, f5, ef, gf, and here white played g5, instead of h3. H3 is the best move because you have to keep the tension. G5 gave black total freedom of moving these 3 pawns. So black played d5. Now probably c takes d should have been played, and then black has a very good game. But white went c5, and now they have a bad position. Bishop f2, very strong move, bishop d5, not allowing f4 because the rook on h1 is hanging, and if white doesn't play f4, then black goes e5. And you will see this pawn center may be very, very dangerous. After bishop d5, rook h d1, e5 was played, and white is nearly lost. King e1, then h6, f4, h takes g, f takes e, bishop takes e5, bishop takes d4, and bishop f4. After rook c3, bishop c6, rook h3. Here, black has very serious advantage. Rook e8, and king f2, knight e5, knight b6, rook a d8, and you see that black absolutely dominates with their minor pieces. White is lost here. Knight c4, knight g4 check, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook h8, king f7, rook takes e8, rook takes e8, and after rook e1, rook d8. Two bishops are very powerful. Bishop e5, rook d3, and after bishop d6, black played king g8. I cannot vouch for the accuracy with which black went on and won the game, but after rook e6, king f7, rook h6, king g7, rook e6, rook h3. Eventually black won. They didn't have much problem winning this game, and because pawn on h2 is hanging, and white has absolutely no threats against the black's king. There is one more game I want you to see. This game was played also against with two masters. In this position, white went queen d1. That's not, of course, the move that can be recommended. Queen normally should go to d2. It's a little more developed square, and not right away after developing the dark square bishop. That's the better way to do. Well, queen d1 was played, castle, bishop e3, queen a5, castle, bishop e6, f3, rook fc8, knight d5, knight takes d5, c takes d, and bishop d7. Let's see what happens in this position. Black is first on c-file. You see b2 pawn is hanging. Black has very nice two bishops, and they are ahead in development. Bishop d4. After this move, black gets an advantage. Bishop takes, queen takes d4, and black correctly exchanges queen. But exchanging queen gives black an access to the back rank to c2. Bishop d3, rook a c8. Now white can never challenge black on c file. This is typical position with some advantage for black without counterplay. And this position is not good. a4, that's another mistake. Putting pawn on the light square where it can be stopped, a5. But the idea why white played a4 was to stop bishop b5 from exchanging bishops, and they were afraid black is going to get to the second rank. Nevertheless, this is a mistake. They should have let black play bishop b5 and take, and rook f2. Black's is still better, but not as bad as it was in the game. a4, a5, rook f2, king f8, g4. That's another mistake. So white is putting too many pawns on the light squares. g5, when there are light square bishops left on the board, you should keep your pawn on the color opposite of your bishop. g4, g5, h3, king g7, king g2, rook c1, rook takes c1, rook takes c1, b3, rook c3, bishop c2. And actually it was very well played game by black. Now they go e6. Now e6, rook d2, king f6, d takes e, and f takes e. They have potentially passed pawn. Of course, rook cannot take on d6 attacking bishop because black is going to take bishop with check. So after d takes e and f takes e, this position became very, very bad for white. Black went king e5, h6, and eventually d5, and not to mention that f3 weakness. White is totally paralyzed, and they lost game without putting any meaningful fight. Now, in conclusion, what can I say about, in general, about how to play in Maroczy bind and how should we study it? Along with the analysis that I provided for you, you should try to get database, it's for serious players, of course, database of Maroczy bind. Try to look for the latest games, because Maroczy bind is being improved by white and black in last several years dramatically. So try to look for the latest games, mostly. But you should look for the previous year's games, because you will see what kind of mistakes been made before. And you have to understand basic key points. Black is cramped, but black has very good potentials. It's like spring. If it opens, you may get an advantage in a lot of cases. It may be in a form of a control on dark squares, owning open file, or getting good outposts for your minor pieces. This is not an easy task, but if you want to play accelerated Draken, and I strongly recommend to do that. Let me put it this way. If you take any serious opening with against e4, there is no easier way to study, and there is no potentially more promising opening than accelerated Draken, which comes together with Maroczy bind. But that's not the opening like Alekhine defense or some variation of center counter, which can be refuted, and possibilities are very, very limited. This is long-term weapon you can use constantly, constantly. And improvements, they come and go for both sides, but opening stays alive, and accelerated Draken is one of the oldest weapon and still stands well and gives very promising positions. So learn accelerated Draken and Maroczy bind, and I wish you good luck. With any questions, find a way of contacting me through Chess for Less or some websites that have my email. Thank you very, very much, and good luck with accelerated Draken and Maroczy bind.